Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and this is my guide on how to set up a table with terrain for a fair and balanced competitive game of Warhammer 40k. This video should show you what I believe to be the proper setup for terrain for a fair and balanced game of Warhammer. It should also explain my thoughts on it and why the terrain on the board really matters when it comes to having a fair and balanced game of 40k. I spent the first few weeks of 9th edition testing out different board layouts myself and also having my patrons test out different boards during our tabletop simulator leagues that I put on for them every month. So I got a ton of feedback and have finally come to a conclusion of how much terrain is needed on a board and the terrain placement needed in order to have a fair and balanced game of Warhammer 40k. So let's just jump right into it. So this is an example board of what I feel like is perfect for 9th edition. This may look like too much terrain to some of you, but with the changes to the board size in 9th edition and the fact that we now play on a smaller board than in 8th edition, getting shot off the board turn 1 is worse than ever when you don't play with enough obscuring terrain. Since most armies are in range to shoot on turn 1, and a lot of armies come with some really strong shooting. So to counter these alpha strikes and losing the game turn 1, we add a bunch of obscuring terrain so that players can't lose the game turn 1 if they don't get to go first. I also suggest still using the old ITC house rule of windows and doorways on the bottom floor of ruins cannot be seen through, since that rule does help mitigate damage from shooting and allows you to hide units more tactically in the bottom floor of ruins instead of having to stand behind them to block the line of sight through the obscuring rule. If you don't want to play with that house rule though, you can still have good and fair games, but personally I think that rule should still be used in combination with the obscuring rule to encourage armies to include more infantry units that can utilize the terrain well instead of just massing nothing but tanks and monsters. So as you can see here, all of these pieces of terrain, except for these two and these two, are all obscuring. So no matter what type of deployment you get, you have a ton of area to be able to hide different infantry units or tanks so that you don't get shot off the board turn 1. Having these two medium-sized ruins and two small ruins in the middle of the board, first off creates more obscuring so it's easier to hide stuff behind. And second, it actually creates this area, this small little battlefield within the battlefield that helps incentivize a lot of tactical movement and placement. To give you an example of what I'm trying to show you guys, there's some obliterators over here, a defiler here, and then these eradicators from the Space Marine player over here. You can easily line up your guys right here, be able to shoot the defiler, but then on the following turn, you're hidden from the obliterators, so you're tactically moving your guys so that you can get damage while not receiving damage on the next turn. Unless your opponent, of course, has something over here or whatnot. Like, obviously, the Chaos player could move these guys this way and then warp time them and then get them in range, but at least it's causing some tactical play, rather than if this big building wasn't here, sure, I get to kill that defiler, but then I'm automatically going to lose these guys to the obliterators the next turn. So that's what I mean about firing lanes and being able to use these 4 pieces of terrain to create tactical movement within the game. Moving on, I do like the 2 wooded areas on the sides as well, because shooting armies do admittedly get a little bit nerfed on a board like this because there's less area to be able to shoot. Instead, you'll have these firing lanes instead of just being able to shoot right across the board no matter what. So in order to kind of balance it out, we also need to have something that kind of hinders melee armies a little bit as well, just to be fair. So we put these wooded area terrain over here, so that way if the shooting army really wants, they can park some stuff like right here, have this shooting lane over here and this shooting lane over here, and then if the melee army's trying to get them, they're going to have to move through these wooded areas and -2 from their charge. So melee armies can do stuff like move into this building, then on the next turn move behind this wall, and then on the next turn go over here and charge some stuff. Whereas shooting armies can move over here while holding this objective and then force melee units to have to move through the wooded area terrain to minus some of their charges. So this type of board does create tactical play and good movement options for both melee and shooting armies, which I really like. Another thing to note about why I like this type of terrain setup is that Deathball armies that want to group up around a couple of aura giving units are bigger and stronger than ever. With stuff like 4-up invulnerable save demon engines in Death Guard, or even +1 to hit on vehicles and Space Marines, those types of armies can be really strong in 9th edition. So having this dense of a board causes a player to actually have to think about what units absolutely need to be in these auras because you can't fit them all. Versus, well, I have enough room to just have my whole army in aura range, so let's just move forward while buffing my entire army. Again, this type of board just causes tactical thinking rather than just move forward and keep everything in aura range. I tested out and had some patrons help me out test the old ITC style terrain loadouts on some of the new board, and almost everyone agreed that the old ITC style of 2 ruins in the center plus some buildings around the side just wasn't enough to cut it with this new smaller sized board. Melee armies got shot off the table because there was nowhere to hide, shooting armies decimated decimated other shooting armies because they got first turn and everything was in range. So yeah, the old ITC style of terrain just doesn't work out in 9th edition in my opinion. Another thing to note is that this type of board makes a ton of stuff viable that otherwise wouldn't be viable on a board with less terrain. For example, you can play a melee army and stand a decent chance at winning the game, since you have a ton of terrain to hide inside or behind while moving up the board. It also makes stuff like flamers more viable, since like melee armies, you now can use the terrain to hide while going up the board and then pop out when you need to melt some stuff. It also makes short-range guns more viable, for again, pretty much the exact same reasons. On top of that, long-range shooting is still viable, because if you set up your long-range shooting on top of a building, or in a good spot where they can get a few different firing lanes going, then yeah, long-range shooting is still viable as well. Especially if it's long-range shooting that ignores line of sight, something like a Basilisk or a Wyvern. So with this type of board, pretty much anything is viable, which is good and healthy for the game. And so I guess that's pretty much it. So let's go over a quick summary of the actual terrain placement, and if you want to change things up, what you can do to change it up and keep it pretty much the same. So I still think that 2 medium size and 2 small ruins, or I guess depending on how you look at it, 2 large size and 2 medium ruins in the middle of the board, that is a definite must. When it comes to these 4 ruins in the corner, I also think that having these large ruins is also a definite must, because it gives you places to hide your stuff when in deployment, and these give you places to hide your stuff while moving up the board. And then I still believe that wooded terrains over here, and also maybe replace these with woods, and that would be a perfect board in my opinion. If you want to, the only stuff that I think you can really replace is you can replace the woods with something like craters. I think that could be alright. But other than that, I still think that these pieces, all of these ruins, should stay the same. And if you just want variety, then just change them out for different looking ruins. And that's pretty much it. But other than that, I feel like this type of setup is the perfect setup for playing a competitive, fair and balanced game of Warhammer 40k in 9th edition. And I guess that's it for this video. It's just a nice quick short one, and I hope the information in this video helps you out with your 40k games and gives you a better understanding of how terrain can really impact the balance of a 40k game, and that terrain actually dictates what is viable and what isn't. Hopefully this video helps you out so you can play with some of the units and armies that you want to while still having a chance at winning games, instead of just getting shot off the table every game. With that said, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button since it does help out the video in the YouTube algorithm, and also if you enjoy this type of content, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified when I make new videos like this. And if you enjoy what I do here on the channel and want to help support the channel even further, I'd like to ask that you check me out on Patreon. Patreon is the main source of income for the channel, and I offer a lot of good rewards for different pledges, including stuff like exclusive access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord, free tabletop simulator leagues to join, personalized coaching from myself, custom list building from myself, and much more. So check me out on Patreon if you want to help support the channel more while also upping your Warhammer 40k game. With that said, thanks to all my past and current patrons, you guys and gals are awesome, and thanks to all you regular viewers as well. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.